Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about perspective of psychology. So before knowing the perspective of psychology, let us know what is perspective. So perspective is particular attitude towards anything. It's a point of view of a person regarding any topic. So what are the perspectives of psychology? So altogether we will be knowing about the seven perspective of psychology. First one is behavioral, second one is psychodynamic, third one humanistic, and fourth one cognitive perspective, and fifth sociocultural, sixth biological, and seventh is evolutionary perspective. So altogether we will be knowing about the uh, altogether we will be knowing about seven perspective. Let us know them in detail. So, first one, behavioral perspective. Whenever we talk about the behavioral perspective, we need to understand that in psychology, we are looking at the behavior of somebody or we are observing the behavior of somebody. So, behavioral perspective is a school of thought that mainly focus on observable behavior and how it is learned. So, if you see a subject, if you observe a object, you can know their behavior. That overt behavior can be known. So overt means you can observe that behavior and you try to understand psychology through the behavioral perspective. So as it is saying that it only observes the overt behavior, it completely rejects the internal mental process. So so here we need to understand that why it completely rejects the study of internal mental process, because it says that internal mental process cannot be seen and cannot be observed. It's like a black box that cannot be scientifically studied. So main central tenet of this behavioral perspective is that all behavior is acquired through the conditioning. So, what is conditioning? It's a process of learning from the environment. So, if you talk about the behavioral perspective, this perspective has some of the key figures like John B. Watson, B.F. Skinner, and they have talked about two types of conditioning. First one is classical conditioning. In upcoming videos, I'll be making video regarding classical conditioning as well. As well, if you want to see the article related to this topic, you can go through www.scienceandpsychology.blogspot.com. There you will find the article related to classical conditioning, which is very student friendly article. Please see that. So, what is classical conditioning? So, classical conditioning is learning through the association. Here, a neutral stimulus is paired with a stimulus that naturally causes a response. And eventually, that same neutral stimulus alone elicits that same response. For example, when a dog is hungry, somebody gives them food, right? So, your dog is responding naturally. But if a person rings a bell and then gives a food to the dog, then what happens is that dog is conditioned here. In a sense, as soon as the bell rings, it thinks that now food will come. So it's the main concept of classical conditioning. Now let's talk about the operant conditioning. So here in operant conditioning, we learn through the consequences. So, any behavior we learn, it can be strengthened and weakened by using reinforcement and punishment. So, next perspective is psychodynamic perspective. It was developed by Sigmund Freud. So, According to Sigmund Freud, he says that we are influenced by our unconscious mind and our early childhood experiences. Because of this unconscious mind and early childhood experiences, our behavior and personality is shaped. So there is always conflict around our mind. There is our mind, which is a battleground of conflicted forces. So, the core concept of this psychodynamic perspective is that there are three-part personality structure, and they are id, ego, superego. So, what is id? Actually, it's primitive instinctual part of the mind that operates on pleasure principle. So, if you are feeling hungry, you immediately want food, right? If a child wants chocolate, he or she wants that chocolate right now. So it is based on pleasure principle and you try to fulfill it immediately. And next one is ego. So this ego is rational, conscious part of the mind that works on the reality principle because it understands the desire of it as well as understand the demands of the external world. Next is superego, the moral component that represent internalized societal and parental standards acting as our conscience. So to understand this ego and superego, I'm going to give you a simple example. Suppose there is a student who is going for shopping. Let's say he is going for a shopping and he sees a shoes. He wants to buy it because he thinks that it is his need, right? So he has got 5,000 rupees. Let's say he has got 5,000 rupees to buy shoes. So when he went to the shop and choose that shoes, the cost is 5,000. Now, according to yield principle, if he gives that 5,000 and buys that shoes, that means he is using this yield principle because he is trying to immediately fulfill that need. But what is ego? But what happens is, what is super ego tells him, oh, it is not just for buying shoes. You need to have food also. Okay, it's your pocket money as well. If you buy shoes, now what will you do? What you will eat? So that time, ego balances between it and superego conflict. He may buy shoes that cost 2,000 and he might save 3,000 for food or his pocket money. So here he fulfills his need also and he saves money for food also. So main thing is if you talk about it, it is based on pleasure principle. He wants it immediately. Superego tells that no, there are some other things you need to act on. Wait, and says that let's balance, let's have a mutual understanding. So, this is the three-part personality structure. The next perspective is humanistic perspective. So, humanistic perspective is known as the third force in psychology because it stands in contrast to the deterministic views of behaviorism as well as psychodynamics. Why? Because it emphasizes about the free will. What is free will? So it's a self-determination, right? And it also emphasizes on self-actualization, that is innate human drive towards self-actualization. That means the fulfillment of one's potential. So, the key concept of this perspective associated with the key figures like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. So, unconditional positive regard. The idea that genuine psychological growth requires a non-judgmental, accepting environment. Unless you are accepted, your emotions are accepted, there is low chances of growth. Once a human being is completely accepted with his personality, and if he is given that positive aspect, there is genuinely psychological growth that which we can see even in mental health counseling, right? So other is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we understand about what drives the human. Firstly, it's a basic needs, right? So, and the at end, it's a self-actualization. Next perspective is cognitive perspective. So, cognitive perspective, it mainly focus on internal mental process. Here, I like to stop you for a moment. That is, in behavioral perspective, we were talking about the observable behavior, right? We were talking about the overt behavior which can be observed. But in cognitive perspective, we are talking about the internal mental process. So, according to behavioral perspective, what we were understanding that it's not easily possible to conduct scientifically. It's not possible to study cognitive perspective or internal mental process, but with time, cognitive perspective also came to the focus because it thought, yes, internal mental process can be understood, like the thinking, memory, problem solving, and its perception. So it views human mind as an information processor, much like a computer. So this approach was a significant rebellion against behaviorism as it made the study of mental process a valid area of scientific inquiry. So this perspective explores how we acquire information from the environment, how we process that information using mental operations, and how we store and retrieve information from the memory. Not only that, and then how we use that information to solve problems and make decisions. This is a very influential perspective in modern psychology and is central to fields like cognitive behavioral therapy. So next perspective is socio-cultural perspective. It mainly highlights the profound influence of social and cultural environments on human behavior and mental process. You can easily understand it because you might have realized just by migrating from one place to another places how the living, how the thinking, and the how your personality start to change. So it argues that individual behavior cannot be fully understood without considering the context in which it occurs. So, if you go through the village area or countryside, you will find different kind of thoughts, feelings, their understanding regarding development, right? And when you come to the rural area or you come to the urban side, to the place where there are lots of facilities, you realize that the thinking perspective is like different. So this perspective examines the impact of various factors. Those factors can be social norms and rules, the unwritten rules and expected behaviors within a group. It's not written, but it's expected. And other is cultural values and beliefs that shared ideals and traditions of a society. And the next one is socialization. It's a process where individuals learn the behaviors and values of their culture. This perspective emphasizes that behavior is not just a product of individual traits, but is deeply embedded in a social and cultural context. Next one is biological perspective. So biological perspective explains behavior by studying the underlying physical and biological process. It's a reductionist approach because it attempts to link psychological phenomena to biological causes. So why this psychological phenomena is occurring? Let's know through the biology. So here this perspective investigates how our genetic influence our personality, our intelligence, our susceptibility to mental illness, how our brain structure functions and affects our thought and behavior, how neurotransmitters and hormones regulate our mood, emotions, and motivation. So, this approach provides a powerful way to understand conditions like depression, schizophrenia by looking at their biological roots. Next, and the last perspective is evolutionary perspective. So, evolutionary perspective applies the principle of natural selection to the psychological traits. It's an extension of biological perspective that suggests that many of our behavior and mental process exist today because they were adaptive for our ancestors. This perspective seeks to explain why certain traits are so common by asking what survival or reproductive advantage they might have provided in our evolutionary history. For example, the universal fear of snakes. Why we feel fear just by saying snakes or a spider? Because it could be an evolved response to ancient threats. Our preference for certain mates might be linked to a drive to pass our genes and ensure the survival of our offspring. It provides a broad framework for understanding fundamental why behind human behavior by examining its historical survival driven origin. So thank you for listening to today's video. These are the references. You can go through the references as well to understand this topic in better manner. Thank you.